So let's talk about why drug testing in this godforsaken sport is basically a joke. I remember going back to 2008, and I remember when we first kind of went through this whole Floyd Mayweather Manny Pacquiao thing. And I remember this was like the first time that drug testing was really a relevant thing and a relevant topic. And I watched fans say that Floyd Mayweather was using drug testing as an excuse not to fight Manny Pacquiao. And fans asked like, "Oh, he's never asked other fighters to, take drug testing before, but suddenly he wants Manny Pacquiao to take drug testing. Does he not believe in himself? Like Manny Pacquiao's a clean fighter. He doesn't give us the inclination that he's ever taken anything." And fans really, really, really thought that it was disrespectful for Floyd Mayweather to ask Manny Pacquiao to take a drug test. And ultimately, in the end, that kind of set a precedent for Floyd Mayweather to drug test every fighter that he fought from that point on. And it also set up a lot of hypocrisy among Manny Pacquiao's team, who made a lot of excuses around why they didn't want to get drug tested. And then eventually they started to drug test. Shit like, "Oh, it's too close to the fight. Oh, it'll drain me, X, Y, and Z." Dude, getting a blood sample taken doesn't drain you of nothing. Um, I would get my blood taken every day for 10 days straight when I was in the hospital with MRSA. I didn't feel drained or anything like that. It was just typical for me to get blood taken out every day at 6 a.m. And Manny Pacquiao being afraid of needles and shit like that. But I remember that being the kind of strong guard. Even though it had not been uncommon, it was rare, but it wasn't uncommon for fighters to ask their opponents to drug test. Mike Tyson infamously asked Evander Holyfield to drug test back in the mid 90s when Evander Holyfield was being suspected of taking performance enhancing drugs. Evander Holyfield didn't make a beef about it. He just kind of carried along. And then as time goes on, the narrative shift from, "Oh, you're too scared, which is why you're presenting the drug test," then it kind of shifted to, "Well, who's the better of the two between USADA and VADA?" And then boxing fans, because one guy preferred to go with USADA, made it their beef to discredit USADA. And ultimately, in the end, as much as people I shouldn't say feel bad. The people who scrutinize and they criticize USADA tend to fail to realize that USADA doesn't protect anybody. And you have a clear example of a drug testing entity that protects its athletes when it came to RUSADA, the Russian anti-doping organization, in which they cannot take samples anymore from Russian athletes, internationally or domestically, because of the scandal that happened prior to the 2016 Olympics. And we've seen very prominent athletes test positive for drugs over the last 10 years in the sport of boxing as a result. And every single time you saw a positive drug test that landed on one side of the fence, you saw this massive influx of people who would criticize those guys. And then when it happened to another side, you would see a level of excuses that happen. I've always kept my stance that I will be naive to drug testing until I see a positive test result. That has always been my case. But what I won't sit there and try to pretend is that this is noble or this makes sense or it means something. Drug testing means absolutely nothing in the sport of boxing at this point. It doesn't matter what belt organization has a drug testing protocol. It doesn't matter what guy wants to do what type of drug testing. None of this shit matters anymore. And a lot of people may feel upset and angry, but that's the truth. Regardless if you are a clean or a dirty fighter, it doesn't fucking matter. And the reason why it doesn't fucking matter is because there are no consistent repercussions. So it doesn't matter if you test positive for a drug that's banned. It doesn't matter if you choose to skip a drug test. It doesn't matter if you refuse to drug test, because you're not going to be punished. Dillian Whyte walks around knowing that he is a repeated offender of the drug testing policy that the British Board of Boxing hands out. And he should be serving a lifetime ban, and he's not. Why? Because it doesn't fucking matter. How many times did Alexander Povetkin test positive for a banned substance, and he was still continued and allowed to fight? Canelo Alvarez has tested positive for a banned substance, and he got a slap on the wrist. There are guys who have had some really difficult situations with drug testing, and they've had to serve the brunt of that testing. Jarrell Miller comes to mind. They threw the book at Jarrell Miller. They threw the book at Lamont Peterson. You know, guys like Luis Ortiz had to serve lengthy bans for getting popped for PEDs. There are so many examples of guys where the consistency is not there. And when we sit here and we talk about fairness, there's no fucking fairness when it comes to drug testing. There's no fairness when it comes to popping dirty. Oscar Valdez should be suspended and stripped for testing positive for a banned substance. But he's not. Why? Because of money. And he's now the second athlete, I believe, to come out of Chepo Reynoso's camp to test positive for a banned substance. If we're going to hold Chepo to the same standards that we held guys like Alex Ariza, guys like Victor Conti, guys like Memo Heredia, then you should be willing to now have suspicions about Chepo Reynoso and his camps. Because that's the level of standard that we criticized those other individuals. Now you have a situation in which it's not just a one-off situation, but it's now a multitude of potential guys who might be using things that are not only at this point unknowable, but potentially using things that have not been discovered yet. And that's a lot of what tends to happen when guys want to catch an edge when it comes to cheating. I'm not some massive fan of Oscar Valdez. I think he's a good fighter. But when good fighters feel the need that they need to cheat, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I don't have nearly the same level of anger about drug testing when it comes to sports like baseball or basketball. Why? Because those sports don't exist in the capacity in which you are shortening your lifespan by playing it. But when it comes to contact sports, especially sports like football, rugby, hockey, where it's very physical, guys legally can fight each other, and boxing, where any punch to your head can end it all. We are making excuses for guys who want to get an edge.